let's jump in, guys. Welcome to our worldview discussion. We are on week 4. I believe we're on
Yes, yeah.
because
Week
we're
4.
only 2 weeks after this one, week 4. And so we are looking at The Universe Next Door. This is a book by James Sire, and it is a basic worldview catalog. And so we have gone through, goodness, let me look at my table of contents to make sure. We went through the introduction. We looked at theism, deism, naturalism, nihilism, and I'm missing one. Introduction,
Existential.
theism, naturalism,
Existentialism.
existentialism. Okay, because I was like, I know I missed one.
I know, right? When you try to run through, I have to keep looking at the table of contents myself, like, because all the names, but even though I know them, it's like it still blends together. So, hey, if you're stuck out there getting confused, it's not easy to keep all those names straight.
It is not. And then what they all mean and how they blend together and how this one flows into that one and how existentialism becomes just the, flow and progression from nihilism and all of that. And so, it's been a lot.
Yeah. I actually have a word to say about that. Maybe I'll try to say it at the end about in terms of our apologetic approach and why we're doing this. So I can say it now or at the end, it's up to you, but it's just something I was thinking about as I was reading through this, Go
ahead and say it now.
Okay. So, I just want everyone to realize, so as I was reading through what Sire does, especially when I got to his chapter on New Age, and I thought, man, this chapter is a hot mess. And it's not because of Sire. That's not a critique of his writing. It's a critique of New Age. It's just all, again, that word I introduced week 1, squishy, right? It's just messy. The whole thing is a mess and it's the nature of these sort of views, even if they don't constitute full worldviews. They're just these approaches to life that are so subjective. It's the nature of what they're built into. And so I'm thinking, how does somebody use this? Like, what's the point of all this stuff that we're having these conversations? And so I just want to encourage people that we're having these dialogues, and it's not like you're going to go, it's not like a Jehovah's Witness. Like when somebody comes to your door and say, oh, I understand what a Jehovah's Witness believes, right? Because I've studied it. There's this very set of doctrinal beliefs. But when we're talking about these views of Eastern mysticism, pantheistic monism that he talks about, when we're talking about New Age stuff, what you need to know is just enough to be able to ask good questions, because you're not going to find anybody who matches exactly what you read. The motivation for this should be, I want to have conversations with my family, with my loved ones. When I hear these certain buzzwords come up, like words that you read, you're like, aha, I have a question. What do you mean by, new consciousness? Or what do you mean by cosmic Jesus? Ask it. It'll give you questions to ask so you can find out what they mean by it. Because what they mean may not match like anything in the book, but the language they're using, they may have bought into some of these ideas. So these are all learning to have lead-ins to these conversations. That's the only way you're going to unpack this in real life, right? Outside of the academic study of these things. That's only giving you a platform to engage people so you can point them to the gospel and why those views are leading you down wrong paths. I guess that's the word of encouragement I have, is just don't be overwhelmed by this. Just let the Holy Spirit bring back to your mind things you've studied when you need it, and he'll give you the words to say, the questions to ask.
Amen and amen. And this truly, we want it to be a tool for people to be able to share the gospel, understanding what beliefs and worldviews may be out there. And then, helping you to be able to formulate good questions so that, you can go out and proclaim the truth of Jesus to someone who might not, believe. So let's jump in, because I don't want to take a lot of time away from these two. But the first one that we're going to look at is Eastern Pantheistic Monism. Mm-hmm. Now, before we even get into what Eastern Pantheistic Monism is, I would like us to really define what pantheism is and what monism is, and then we can look at what Eastern Pantheistic Monism is.
All is God, God is all, that kind of concept, right? God is the universe is God, the tree is God, the desk is God, you are God, I am God. Some sort of God is in everything. It can be a consciousness though, right? It doesn't have to have personhood. So we don't give God a name, but just the awareness of the universe and its existence. It has its own self-awareness to create. That is pantheism. All is God, God is...
Yes, that's what I was hoping we would get to, the fact that God is in all, and that all is in God, and that God is in the tree, and that God can also be in the chair, but then I am also, like, God is in me, and, all of that, and that it is very impersonal. And so we'll continue that way of thought, and like, well, how can I know God, or how can I know anything? As we talk about Eastern pantheistic monism. So, but how would you define monism?
So the idea of monism or monism, however you want to say it, doesn't really matter. It's from the Latin here we got mono, one, right? Singular. So like polytheism, many gods. Monism is talking about the nature of that reality. It's not about the God stuff, but the nature of the actual reality. It's one thing. There is only one thing. There's one substance. Everything is a part of that one substance. It's in contrast to, like, say, Cartesian dualism, the guy Descartes, right? He talked about we are one thing, but then there's an immaterial thing. It's a separate substance. There's a separate immaterial substance, and there's a material substance, and those are very much divided, right? And how those interact gets, okay, well, how do we define that? But for monism, it's saying there's one substance. There's one essence to all of reality and all things. Even though they appear differently, they're really that same thing. They're the same in essence with one another.
So then let's talk about now in understanding pantheism and understanding monism. How does this, when brought together, show up in Eastern pantheistic monism?
Yeah. So the Eastern side, when we think of that, we have to look at that word would be it's a different approach to understanding the questions of life, those worldview questions, origin, meaning, morality, destiny, right? But it's not answering them through enlightenment logic. It's not saying the rules of logic apply, and I can reason my way into discovering, stuff about through science or other methods like that to discover something true about my world. They have a more, spiritualized and more, I don't want to say emotional because that maybe sounds like a negative, but it's more of a spiritualized approach to discovering a reality. In other words, and sometimes logic doesn't help at all. Logic is actually the enemy. Trying to make sense of things is the opposite of what you have to do. You have to try to discover truth is in the nonsensical things of life. So, and that's literally where you see examples in the book he talks about. So when you think Eastern, think the one kind of big takeaway, just think it comes out of the Asian countries, right? The East as opposed to the West. So China, India, those sort of nations, those Asian different religions that come up, and there's many of those. But it's the opposite approach of rationalism, the opposite approach of enlightenment. So that's the Eastern. Pantheism, again, God is all is God. So a non-rational approach to discovering the essence of God, and God is in all, and God is of all. And then monism is all ultimately one thing, all ultimately one reality. We just have different perceptions of that reality. Some of those are illusory, they're false perceptions, but there is a right perception that we have to get to that one reality.
So in a sentence, put you on the spot, how would you summarize Eastern pantheistic monism?
I guess if I had to, again, this is a big broad brush. You'll find this in the book. There's so many things that he's trying to encompass into this. But I would say a non-rational approach to discovering the one reality.
Yeah.
Let's
I think that's good. I think that's good because as we see it throughout the chapter, it questions the reality all the time. There's always a question of, the real, how do you know the real? Is there a way to understanding prime reality? What is knowledge? How do we access knowledge and things like that? Yeah. And so in looking at this worldview, and especially in looking at it in light of like our Christian understanding of God and God being, triune, and God is a distinct being, in Eastern pantheistic monism, the idea of God is very, one, impersonal, but two, it almost, to me, and help me understand, I might be wrong, it seems subjective, but not subjective. Like it's whatever I encounter, God is there, God is in that. But then if I encounter something and I don't believe that God is in it, then it would, in essence, be a part of my imagination or an illusion. It essentially doesn't exist because God must exist in everything.
Yeah. So that's where, again, and I think he does a good job, Sire does a good job of trying to explore these, but recognize, man, these are difficult things to wrap around your head because it's so different than the way we view the world as Westerners. Whether we like it or not, we all have this sort of Enlightenment influence, the way we look at reason and rationality, existence, the universe, the natural world, the spiritual world. We all have this framework for that. And it's such a different approach. And so that's why he ends up emphasizing more the sort of, how did these Eastern pantheistic monism, how did that get syncretized into the West? That's where he spends a lot of time of how it gets adopted and used in the West. Because even the way we approach, so like there's a lot of people that would say, oh, I'm a Buddhist, like Western Hollywood people, like, oh, I'm a Buddhist. But, you know, their Buddhism is not the same as like if they grew up in a Buddhist country in, you know, East Asia somewhere. It's sort of the Hollywood version of Buddhism. So we sort of distort these things and take the pieces and the parts that we like and don't like. But at the same time, that's allowed because there are many paths to discover our identity as God. So the way I would, this becomes, I think, an important pathway of understanding the difference between like when we get to New Age sort of mysticism and the Eastern sort of pantheism, is that the sort of pantheistic idea is it begins with this ontological metaphysical assumption that there is some sort of God consciousness, this impersonal God, if you will, being. You don't have to use the label God, just the God reality, something exists. And that existence preceded our existence. And the purpose of our existence is to move forward and be reunited with that oneness for which we have, you know, kind of become separated from, because we fall into the cares of life or the illusions of life that we think suffering is bad. But suffering doesn't even exist. Suffering just keeps us from recognizing our oneness with the God consciousness, right? But that metaphysical assumption that the cosmic consciousness existed, that God exists, precedes our existence. And it's almost the opposite with the New Age. And we'll get to that a little bit, where it begins with us and then we become that God. We create that God existence. And that's kind of one of those big differences.
So then in pantheistic monism, what is the prime reality? If God is in everything, what then becomes the source of reality, or what is really real?
Yeah. I this is where things may depend on who you ask, but here's the way I would my big takeaway. I think the thing that makes the view that I think is most relevant to us in our American context, I'll give that view. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. I think the way they would answer that question would be that the cosmic consciousness, who we could call God, or the Jesus, cosmic Jesus, or we could just call Buddha, we could label it anything you want. We could say Gaia, Mother Earth. That cosmic thing has always existed and will always continue to exist. Our material reality, we're living it, but it's not real. It's an illusion. Somehow we're in this sort of, it's like the Matrix. I think the Matrix might be the better, like kind of a crossover example. You live in this computer-generated reality. Neo discovers that the computer's making up my self-perception, my reality. But when I break out of that, I realize, I still exist, but in a different reality than I once understood it, right? He then struggles. It's not this perfect beauty. And it's almost the opposite for Eastern, pantheistic monism, where our reality is the bad one that we think is real. But if we can break out of our matrix, we'll realize that there is no such thing as suffering. There is no such thing as even me. I don't exist. My existence is an illusion. The sense of I doesn't exist. When I become enlightened, when I reach that state of nirvana, perfection, understanding, then I realize I'm just a part of the God consciousness of reality. And then I cease to exist as a person because there is no personhood. There's existence. The other analogy real quick, sci-fi movies do this all the time. I used to like, there's one, Stargate, the TV series, not the movie, the Stargate SG-1. There was always these people that they would reach this certain stage and they'd become enlightened, and it's called transcendence. They'd transcend their human physical being and they become these pure energy beings. Star Trek does a lot with energy beings. Beings exist as pure energy. Other dimensional beings, they talked about it in sense of alternate dimensions of reality. That's how we've kind of westernized that concept. So when you see those things happen in Star Trek or Stargate, SG-1, that kind of thing, the transcending or the existing in alternate dimensional realities, that's our Western version of that pantheistic monism.
So if nothing really is truly real, like in its core and essence, and that all things, it seems like, converge. I think even Sire says this, that there is like this ultimate unity between all things. What then is knowledge, and how can I access knowledge?
Yeah, so from this particular perspective, knowledge is the recognition that we have no knowledge. So knowledge is the absence of knowledge, in a sense. It's like you get these phrases like, what is the sound of one hand clapping, right? It's these, guru guys sitting there in the robe thingy, and so they're, they phrase things in a way that it's impossible to understand because there is no understanding. And that's the beginning of wisdom, that you can't understand. So when you say, oh, I'm suffering, you have to say, no, you have to realize there is no concept of suffering. So we don't have to end suffering or stop suffering because suffering doesn't exist. So when you say, I'm going to go feed the homeless person because they suffer on the streets, they'd say, you're buying into the illusion. That's what's keeping you from converging with the ultimate consciousness of reality, the ultimate God reality that exists. Those illusions of the life that is there in front of you is the barrier. You think you have knowledge, but until you recognize you have no knowledge, that's the only way you gain knowledge, is to deny there is such a thing as knowledge. I mean, that's ultimately kind of the messy ideas that we're dealing with.
Yeah. Sire actually writes, I think on page 145, that human beings in their essence are beyond knowledge. And so it's, when we get to that place that you're talking about, maybe this transcendental place, or, this way out there place, when we are really unified with everything else, we understand that we are actually beyond knowledge. He also talks about the, Eastern pantheistic monism as not actually having doctrine. It's a non-doctrinal.
Yeah.
Because you really can't understand truth, because there really is no true reality. And so if there's no true reality, how do we bring together truth, especially when humans in their prime existence are beyond knowledge?
Yeah. And that kind of, your comment there gets to Elaine's question, are there sort of religious set of texts or whatever? And the answer would be no. You could, to some degree, say, well, all religious texts can point us to this thing, but all religious texts at the same time would divert us from discovering our true reality. So at the same time, they help us, and at the same time, they hurt us. They are both and. They are a distraction and they are a help. It's like you get these things where, well, what does that mean? Well, you discover the meaning. So it becomes very much centered on the subjective perceptions of how I view life, what I view reality to be. There is no unifying statement or confessional. except that the belief that someday we will become one with each other. And so discovering my oneness with you, Monique, is going to help me discover that I don't, my personhood that I have as me is actually the barrier to discovering my oneness. But even like saying there is a person called Monique is a barrier because you don't exist. That's an illusion. That's the thing that sidetracks me. So why would it matter if you've written some religious text? Because all those things are distracting us from discovering that they're all hindrances to this thing that I'm trying to become, which is one with the cosmic God. It's very not satisfying.
No, it isn't. Again, you talk a little bit about death in history, because the way that I think about it, and this is probably because of my more Western mind, to me, just logically, are we waiting to, I mean, I guess logically I would think, well, these other people didn't attain this. So like if I look in history, we don't have any proof or evidence. But again, that would go to rationality and things that are really real and evidence and all of that. Yeah. But I'm wondering, how do they think about history and how do they think about death? Is death the point where we reach that ultimate reality? And then what do they do with history?
Well, history really has no inherent meaning. The meaning is what we give to it. So when we look at something that happened in the past, trying to give it meaning is probably a distraction for most people. Trying to impute meaning to that. We get into this very confused part about the moral side too that I have to address here. So, ultimately it's saying there is no right or wrong. It's like this Taoist approach. They're the yin and the yang. There's good and bad, but in the truth, they're both the same. There's neither moral evil. There's no moral good. There just is what is. And those are all distractions from this future thing. So I say that part because, well, what happens when we die? Well, some might say there's a reincarnation, which, we come back as something, because if we have not reached enlightenment, we have to keep going through this cycle of birth. It's cyclical. Death and life is a cycle. There is not a linear approach to history. It's not a beginning and an end. There's just a cycle of birth and death, rebirth. We live through the cycle until we reach enlightenment. But somehow that process is connected to we pay the sort of price for our past. So the idea of this is like if you've done bad stuff in your past, you come back as you're reincarnated in the hierarchy of things as a lower thing. So don't kill a bug because that might be cousin Jimmy who came back as a bug because he was really mean, right? But the problem is
Jimmy gonna be on the bottom of my shoe.
Yeah.
I ain't playing.
But if there's no good or bad, what is he paying the price for? It's sort of nonsensical. But then if you try to point that out, we're saying, well, then you're trying to apply logic and Western thinking. You're just not understanding what it takes. And that's your barrier to understanding, is that you're trying to be reasonable about it. Okay. So stop trying to figure it out, Monique. That's it. That's the problem.
Well, I'm not trying to figure nothing out, but if little cousin Jimmy come across me crawling on my wall.
Yeah. Yeah. So death is not the end. It's just a part of that cycle of birth and rebirth and death. But eventually you can break out of the cycle once you reach enlightenment. How do you know? I don't know. There's nobody who can know, except we just believe that, there's just a belief that it is.
And no one can actually tell you how you can get out of the cycle the right way, because truly there is no right and wrong.
Exactly. Which is why you get in some practices, we have, like in India, the caste system, right? Where somebody is in the lower caste, from the lowest caste to the highest caste, right? You have all these caste systems. And these are related to these concepts of birth and rebirth and lower states, so you're paying for the past. So in that system, I'm actually doing something bad. So if I'm in the highest caste, Monique, and you're in the lower caste, if I try to help you because I see you starving, I'm actually harming your process of enlightenment. So I'm actually harming myself, because I'm not going to reach enlightenment if I'm acknowledging that suffering is real, and you're not going to reach because you're not doing the necessary suffering to discover there is no such thing as suffering, so that you can be, reach enlightenment. So there is no compulsion or need to help. Matter of fact, helping is bad because we're recognizing that we think there's a bad, but truth is we have to say there is no bad. And your head starts to hurt at this point because you're like, wait, what are we saying again? It gets very confusing. I feel confused when I describe it because yeah.
I think it makes me ask the question then of like, and I think this is just more of like the probably justice oriented side of me of, well, how does someone get lifted out of poverty if they're in the lowest caste? Well, what do they think of it? Would, someone upholding this worldview, what would that person think of education? Those in the upper caste can be educated, but those in the lower caste can't be educated. And so, but why would you be educated anyway when truly there is no right and wrong, truly even like understanding all of the principles or tenets of certain, frameworks, medicine or sociology or, whatever, it would be almost null and void.
Yeah.
Because of the framework of the worldview itself.
Yeah.
And so at some point, somebody believes something different, or at least they might be participating in a not fully in alignment with what the worldview stipulates.
Yeah. And you bring up, see, that's where the transition happens. So remember, kind of step back to where we came from. So we had the Enlightenment, right? Reason, rationality, that's going to lead us into truth. So if we can reason our way into reality, well, that leads to nihilism, this Great Depression of ideas because there's no hope. We haven't found it. Then we get a secular existentialism, right? Where, hey, let's just value humanity. Let's put humanity at the center. But we're still not seeing, that's still not helping. So some people reach out to these, say maybe that will be the solution. But that almost is saying putting man at the center is still the wrong thing because man doesn't even exist. Humanity, you don't exist. I don't exist. That is very distasteful to the Western mindset, especially influenced by the Enlightenment, because of the issues like you say, justice or right and wrong. So somebody can tell me that if I see somebody out there kicking puppies, that's not bad, right? Oh, well, it's just the puppy doesn't exist. It's an illusion. But yet when I hear my little puppy yelp or I see the suffering, I say, yeah, you might be telling me that, but that's bad, right? I see some woman being attacked. I say, well, you can tell me she doesn't exist, but I hear her screams. That doesn't satisfy, right? So I think that that's what then pushed others more towards a westernized view of Eastern mysticism, that Eastern pantheism, towards the New Age sort of concept where we could sort of pull in naturalistic ideas of that we are real. The material world isn't an illusion. It's real, but it's still going to push us towards this singularity, towards this oneness of, existence. So we like that idea because we don't need God, especially the Christian God, for that future hope. But we can also say, well, reality is still real. The material world still has meaning for us. So now I can be spiritual and sort of towards the oneness of Eastern, pantheistic monism. I can still strive for that, but I don't have to deny my experience.
So I think that's a great way to move right into the New Age spirituality without religion. Mm-hmm. What in the world? Because my first question wanted to be, well, is there a New Age spirituality with religion? But before we even go down that path, what is New Age spirituality without religion?
Yeah, so I think what he means by that is that when he says religion, he's saying there's not without the structure of, any systemic approach to, I go to Sunday worship and I sing this song. There's no ritual. There's no set expectation of the way you do it. You just commune with nature. You are your own ritual. You set the standard. So by religion, I think he means the structured ways we try to say, if I go and pray, then I and I say my amens and I do Catholic, for our Fathers, say 3 Hail Marys, 4 acts of contritions, you've got forgiveness, right? There's none of that structure to it. So it's unstructured. It's not organized. That's what he's, I think, referring to by using that. So New Age, we want the spiritual. We want the sense that there is something that transcends the pure nuts and bolts of nature, the atoms and the quarks and the neurons. That stuff is real, but there has to be something beyond that. There's this belief that there must be a spiritual reality outside of that that tells us our future has meaning, right? We're trying to escape nihilism still, trying to get out of nihilism. We're keeping man at the center, which existentialism does, right? So we're still, humans are the center, but that centering doesn't have hope. What's the end? Well, now I'm going to try to say that I can have this spiritual reality does exist. We can become God. God is all is God, but we humans are the ones who create that God. So this is the way to think about it this way, the meshing between the New Age and the Eastern. So remember, one of the core commitments of sort of Darwinian naturalism, human evolution, right? We evolved from these lower forms of life. We evolved into this higher form of life, so there's hierarchy of life. Now we're going to take that concept of evolution and extend it to our spiritual reality. We can evolve into higher beings. We can become the beings that we imagine we can become. We can cooperate with nature. And matter of fact, we can control nature and become the greater humanity that doesn't yet exist, but we'll create the humanity. And eventually we'll keep creating humanity, recreating humanity. Eventually we'll be post-human, and that post-human existence ends in some sort of spiritual singularity or godness or God consciousness, whatever you want to call it. The more scientific minds will call it the singularity. We're talking to transhumanism at this point, or the more spiritual sort of touchy-feely, new agey, we'd say, cosmic consciousness.
That's a lot. I'm trying to still piece it together in my head. So if we can evolve, are we evolving in this new age spirituality? Are we evolving to be like God? Are we evolving into being our own God? What is the thought about God? Is it much like Eastern pantheistic monism, that God is in everything, and so God is in everything in the new age as well, except I now have the opportunity to evolve and become a better version of myself, and thus a better God.
Yeah. Elaine asked, is this satisfying? How is this satisfying at all? Well, that's the problem. It's not. But to answer that, so it's a really good question though, Monique. So here's the way I kind of thought I could maybe summarize this. So remember, Eastern, the pantheistic monism begins with the ontological assumption that the God consciousness exists, right? God, the universe, all that exists has always existed. Our task is to become part of that God reality, right? So we put off the illusion of my material world, and I discover that I'm a part of this oneness that has always existed and will continue to exist, right? I have no person identity. So on the New Agey sort of side, when that gets meshed together with Enlightenment naturalism, it's this, that God comes into existence as we come into existence. So we're evolving. It begins with the material world, and it moves outwards towards the ontological, towards the ultimate thing. So ontologically, all that exists is nature, but we create a new ontology, a new existence for ourselves. So God becomes as we become. The spiritual side of that might be, sort of more progressive Christian ideas, our process theology, where sort of God evolves as we evolve. As we become more self-aware, God becomes more self-aware of himself, if we want to give that God sort of identity. If you don't care to give God identity, it can still be impersonal. But we are creating God as we become God. Yeah, it's all a process. It's that evolutionary process. And the science side of that's where you get into the concept of like transhumanism, which he doesn't address in the book. That's more of where I've spent some of my time studying that sort of idea, because Christians do buy into that. So, we evolve from lower pre-human creatures. We exist as humans now, but someday we'll be post-human. We'll exist beyond humanness. And so the technological, the Western side of that is we use technology. So we talk about artificial intelligence, right? We're creating the new intelligence, or we can become cyborg humans, right? These humans that use technology to help us advance beyond our limitations. So what are our limitations? Whether they're moral or physical, we can transcend those by becoming post-human. And ultimately, the goal is to transcend everything we know about our existence today, to become perfected in this God consciousness. Again, the more transhumanist word is singularity. We reach the singularity, right? The ultimate existence where we exist beyond who we are. And yeah.
Would you say that singularity is in the West what that unity is in the East?
Yeah, so I think in the East, the unity already exists. We just have to get past the illusion of reality to discover we're already a part of that unity. For in the West, we have to create that unity. We have to become the unity that is the ultimate goal of who we are. So it sort of reverses the process in a sense,
So
yeah, that's
in the East, unity, in the West, singularity.
Yeah.
But really,
in the East, it begins with unity. We're confused about our unity. In the West, we're divided, but we discover unity. We're working towards that unity.
Yeah. What is the, in looking at the fact that we are working toward that unity, my initial assumption is that there must be steps to get us to that unity, but those steps would presuppose knowledge or would impose the idea that we must have some kind of either prime reality or some kind of knowledge, some way of understanding knowledge in order to get there, where I know in the East that wouldn't be the case. For the New Age, what is the source of knowledge or reality, and how do we know what we know? Is there a way to know what we know, or are we just kind of making it all up as we go along?
Yeah, no, they would say that there is knowledge about stuff, and knowledge can help us gain and achieve this sort of cosmic consciousness or singularity. And I'll use those two words just for the sake of sort of maybe simplicity to get those two strains. So one group, the one that's looking for the cosmic consciousness, and I think this is where most of the book spends its time, talking about like these gurus that are trying to. Knowledge comes from our experience, but maybe some of that's experiencing animal. We have like the sympathetic animal persona, right? We look in, my spirit animal guides me into knowledge. My spirit animal is the puppy, and the puppy guides me into knowledge. It could be it could be some Gaia, Earth itself, Gaia, which is an old Roman name for Earth, but it could be other names, right? Where the Earth guides me. So when I see nature under attack through global climate change, I know that nature is calling out to me. Mother Earth is speaking to me. She's suffering and I need to help her. So I have knowledge of the suffering of the Earth through pollution, and I need to do what's right for the sake of the Earth, for the betterment of the natural world. And this will help us achieve our ultimate destiny or purpose. So when we talk about that cosmic consciousness stuff, the material world can tell us something true, but what do we asking of the material world? So it's animals or spirit beings that exist, or it's nature itself, like the Earth. Those might guide us towards that cosmic consciousness. The other side is more technology-based. So the idea of singularity comes from that transhumanist movement where our knowledge creates technology. Technological innovation helps us discover what's true about our potential future. And the more we integrate our lives into technology, the more we have hope of transcending our human limitations and becoming the singularity that we desire, right? And we can spiritualize that too. There's tons of people that have talked about that put a Christian veneer. There are Christian transhumanists. that go back, 100 years, almost 70, 80, 90 years, that talk about, they put a Jesus veneer on this New Age sort of goal of becoming one, this singularity.
Christian transhumanist, to me, doesn't seem right. I mean,
yeah, it's not.
Yeah, maybe they're. Oh, that was gonna be petty. Sorry. Maybe they're just misled. Yeah. Sometimes I have to filter in real time, but you know that. So there are those who are misled.
Yeah, I would say so.
But I mean, read Galatians, people. Read the whole book of Galatians to understand people who are misled.
Yeah. Someday we can do a whole show on transhumanism. I've written quite a bit about it as part of some of my PhD stuff. It's really important because Christians buy into this stuff, and it really distorts our view of God, of humanity. It does play into the concepts of race because it ties into the historic things of eugenics, which we have done shows on years ago at this point. That eugenics ties into transhumanist movement quite directly. Even though most would deny it today, they still have the principles of it. So it's very dangerous. But it flows from this New Age sort of syncretism with enlightenment, spirituality, the search for oneness, that we're becoming what we want to become, and we can lead that charge through technology. So again, those are just the two sides. The technology side of singularity. The other side would reject technology. So think of global climate change activists. They're anti-technology, right? Technology is the enemy of the, becoming what the earth needs to become. But they're both trying to achieve what they think is that same goal, this cosmic reality, cosmic consciousness on the anti-technology side, the pro-technology side, the singularity. They're trying to achieve the same goal, so to speak. They just think that there's very opposite ways of what counts as knowledge, what counts as truth, and what leads us towards that end goal.
So then, but what is their end? Like, what is death for them? Is it that you come back, kind of like with some forms of pantheistic monism, that you'll, don't be cousin Billy climbing on the wall, or is it that there is truly a heaven and a hell?
Yeah, I think almost everybody would reject heaven and hell for sure. That is pretty clear. And I think that would be a point of unity for these. But what that other answer is probably very much different. This is why when I said at the beginning, we're giving you hints and insights, like we're laying down the breadcrumbs, but you're going to have to ask somebody, what do you believe that leads? I mean, that's really the only way I know, because it's such a fractured worldview, if you will, right? It's such a fractured thing. The worldview itself says everybody creates their own reality. Everybody creates their own truth. My truth is the only truth, right? It's very relativistic in that sense. And so there is no one answer. That's the answer. But definitely, I think there would be pretty clear consensus. The Christian concept of heaven and hell does not exist. That's where we get into like the sort of progressive Christianity where, well, hell isn't a real place. The singularity, so to speak, or the cosmic consciousness, we're all going to heaven. We're all saved. We all experience that same ultimate reality, presence, life with God, right? They're going to all drive towards, we're all a part of this utopian future. So I think all of them would believe there's some sort of utopian real future. They just agree about what the nature of that is. The Christians in this camp would want to say, well, that's, eternity with the God who we know from the Bible. And when we say we know, we mean, well, not because he's historical, but we have these subjective views of who God is, right? But yeah, we know him from the Bible. But for the sort of singularity folks, the transhumanists, especially the non-Christians, that's just sort of the techno. We ultimately transcend human form and become just pure consciousness, right? So when you see like these sci-fi movies, right, where you upload your mind into a computer, then that's the ultimate transcendent reality, just pure consciousness, pure thought. For the cosmic consciousness folks, that ultimate reality is just pure spiritual being. So we become pure spirit, pure essence, right? So it doesn't even emphasize thinking or rationality or technology. It's the opposite of that. But there's some sort of spiritual essence that we become, light or power or energy or some sort of thing like that, that they would pick on, but they would pick as their goal. But ultimately, everybody's going to be in that same reality. It just might take some of us longer to get there. So yeah, reincarnated, or maybe there's some sort of middle state in another dimensional plane that we go to after this life until we get to the next life, or we go and live in some other world until we travel through worlds until we become that. It's a whole mishmash of ideas because it's all based on desires, personal, existential, man-centered. What's my vision of beauty? That's the way we must get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I wish I can go live in a mall. Let me, that's just my ultimate reality end. Okay, so there were a couple things that you said that made me think of what we're seeing in culture today. And the first one was my spirit animal. And it made me think of furries and this whole movement of, non-human beings. Yeah. And that I might be part of a non-human being, otherkin, or, Therians and things like that. And so, is that part of that?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so that's like...
This is all connected. Matter of fact, there's a book that somebody who's an advocate of this stuff wrote. It was in the title, I'm going to get the title wrong off the top of my head, but it's basically transgenderism is the central pathway to transhumanism. And the whole concept is that, okay, think about this. I'll paint a real quick picture of how this goes. For Darwin, the idea was that the idea of dual, male and female, evolved over time, right? We were all sort of this amoeba, the thing, and then eventually we evolved into this sort of dualist sexual reality, right? Male, female, for the sense of survival. This was just purely survival. That's the only reason we evolved into male and female. There's no intrinsic value to maleness or femaleness. It's all a biological mechanism to help us, survive. But if culturally we evolve beyond that and we can transcend humanness to some greater future, why do we need male and female at all? We can transcend that sort of expression that was necessary historically, but we don't need it anymore. So on the path to achieving our cosmic consciousness or our singularity, we do away with the physical need for the binary of male and female. And then once we do that, we can say, why even be human at all? Why not otherkins? Why not? Why can't I be a fairy? Why can't I be a dragon? Why can't I be a unicorn? And then we have surgeries to, shape our physical body, not because the physical even matters ultimately, but it's a way of trying to help my body discover its new spiritual reality as this other thing, this other creation, that our imagination determines my reality, right? So instead of enlightenment, reason, I think, therefore I am. Now it's I dream, therefore I am, right? That's what shapes our reality. And so, yes, the transgender, the trans species, the transracial, all of these are beginning with, hey, this is our reality now, but I can dream, I can imagine a different reality. That's what we must transcend to. And if I need technology to help me through surgeries, or if I need computers, that's fine. Or if it's just by worshiping trees, I can transcend it just in my mind, and that's all that it takes.
Is the book you're talking about called From Transgender to Transhuman, a Manifesto on the Freedom of Form?
Who's the author of that one?
Martine Rothblatt?
Yeah.
Harold Rackman?
Yeah, that's the one.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you said this is this is on the side of the pro-transgender to transhumanist movement. Right?
Yeah. That's okay. I have not read, I just came across that book literally this last week. And the way I heard it framed to me is, yes, that he is pro that. He's laying out the positive case for this. So,
well, I just bought it, so I'll let you know how it goes.
Okay. But I plan on reading it. It's on my reading list, actually, because of this conversation. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is fabulous. In terms, he's going to lay it out straight, right?
Yeah. The other thing, and we will let you guys know too, I mentioned the title. I'm not going to recommend the book. I'm not going to put a link to the book in the comments or anything like that because I haven't read it and Joe hasn't read it. And so we can't tell you, all of you, hey, you're going to see this, but, be careful of these parts. And we want to definitely be respectful and just careful with you as a human person. And so I'm not going to put that link there, but we will keep you posted as to what it's about. The other thing that you said was kind of like the implications of morality and how in this whole spiritual new age, we're looking at things like my truth, which is really, this idea of the lack of objective truth and this whole focus on my truth. The world will be as I see it, what is real to me. And I think that that's something that we see as we wrap up, but something that as we see in so many conversations, when I think about sex and or gender and, that whole conversation of my truth, this is my truth. Or when we think about the conversation of race and the my truth in there shows up as microaggressions. It's my truth. Like I'm the one who understands. I'm the only one who can understand it's racism because it's my truth of race and racism. And so one of the reasons why I bring those two things up is because we are wanting you to be able to connect how these worldviews really have implications today. They show up today. No one's walking around saying, well, I'm an Eastern pantheistic bonus. No one's saying that. Yeah. And no one's definitely going to say, well, they might say, I think there's more openness now to be like, well, I'm in new age, and things like that. But no one is really, for the most part, going to rush up to you and tell you, this is my spiritual title, but they will tell you how that works out for them, how their worldview works out. I was just on a plane a couple of days ago and I heard this, I overheard a conversation between two complete strangers where one man was telling the other man all about why he thinks humans are fundamentally good. And because humans are fundamentally good, we should impose socialism because humans are fundamentally good. So socialism is the only answer.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're spot on. Yes. Everything you said is spot on. And, or if people do use labels, they use them differently. So I say, I'm a Christian. Well, what does that even mean? And then all of a sudden they're describing, well, Jesus loves me and he gave me this spirit animal that I follow. Or, well, I had a student, I was like, I'm a Christian. Oh, yeah, I was raised. And, but I love astrology. Astrology is this whole thing. Well, I was like, okay. You're giving yourself a label, but it's a wrong label. Or you choose no label, but how do I escape? Well, this is the questions and engagement. And I won't be able to answer this fully, but Renee did say something related to what you're talking about. The my truth thing, not the truth, the whole truth, but the truth. How does my truth hold up in a courtroom? So Renee, there is a video that one I created on what is truth that is shared by the Center for Biblical Unity here to my YouTube channel. I talk about that. I actually think the concept, there's nothing wrong. The concept of my truth does fit within a Christian worldview framework, but where it diverges is if we think my truth is the ultimate reality of truth. But my truth is still works if I say, like, for example, my truth is I love peanut butter, right? Is that true or not? Well, does it correspond to a reality that I truly love peanut butter? Okay, well, that's true. It can still be false. If I could say, okay, I like Monique. She is a wonderful person. That could be it's not your truth. You may not like her. Well, who would say that? Nobody, but you know what I'm saying.
A lot of people,
right? But that would be true for me, but not true for you. So there are things that are true for me that aren't true for you, but to count as truth, they still have to correspond to a reality. So if I say I like Monique, but yet behind her back, I'm stabbing her back, that is a lie. Okay, because I've lied about what my truth is. So there's still a truth component that has to be measured from the Christian perspective. When the secular existentialist, right, or the whatever says my truth, or the total relativist, or the postmodern person says my truth, what they mean by that is, if I feel it, it is true. That defines truth. That's the distinction. So when somebody says my truth, that's okay. The question you want to ask is, what do you mean by that? Okay, so don't automatically dismiss somebody. Matter of fact, I think this is a point of evangelistic opportunity for Christians, that we get up with, oh, well, my truth is such a terrible thing. I think we're missing the evangelistic opportunity, because there's an inroad there. Well, let's explore that. When you say that, what do you mean? My truth is, this is the race question. Maybe let's bridge to that, because I know our time is getting close. So if I say my truth is that racism is bad, okay, that's your truth. Should that be my truth? Can I have a truth that it's good? Oh, no. Oh, wait a second. What is your objective standard by which you're saying your truth now has to be my truth? If your truth is that you are a woman and you were born a man, but your doctors identified you now you as a man, but now you identify as a woman, and I have to call you by your pronouns, you're saying that your truth transcends you and exists somewhere out here. Okay, well, how does that work? Explain that to me. At what point does your truth have to be my truth? Because what if my truth is different than your truth? So there's an opportunity here to not dismiss the my truth concept, but to use it as a point of engagement to unpack all this craziness that we're doing with worldviews, if that makes sense. So I think there's an opportunity here that we have that we're missing sometimes.
No, I hear you. I tend to call it like subjective truth versus objective truth. If I hit my toe, it could be a subjective truth that I am now like, I don't like Legos because my truth is that Legos hurt every time I step on them. You know what I mean? It just, there's something that's true to me versus something that is true all the time throughout all times, places, and spaces. An objective truth is that 2 + 2 is 4, regardless of skin color, socioeconomic status, or ability. 2 + 2 is 4, where there are other things that may or may not be true based on a person's experience.
Yeah, I break down. There's 3 kinds of subjective truths. There's the my truth kind of thing. There's a synthetic truth, which is a cultural agreement truth. Like, hey, we can agree that we won't enslave people. That's a synthetic truth. Yeah. In other words, culture says that's bad. But does that make it objectively bad? Not necessarily. Then there's sort of like the sort of empirical truths that we observe through science. Those are contingent truths because they depend on nature being orderly and structured by God. But if God says, hey, we get a new world someday, the physics of the new reality won't be the same as our physics. I mean, we'll float and do cool stuff. That'd be awesome. So what's true now in terms of gravity may not be true when Christ's kingdom comes. Yeah. So it's still a subjective, it's still a contingent truth in that sense that it depends on something objective, but it all goes back to God. That's where the Christian goes with it.
That's awesome. Now, when you think about the conversation of race that many in our culture are currently having, how do you think these 2 worldviews have impact, or what is the implication on race from these 2 worldviews?
Yeah. I when I was reading through this, because I know that's our kind of go-to end question, I was reading these chapters and thinking and praying, okay, God, what do I do with these? The problem is I don't know that there's one answer, but I will say this. I'll pick on, I think for the Eastern, pantheistic monism, the answer is race doesn't exist. Racism doesn't exist because we don't exist. So there's no need in that worldview to address the problem of racism because it's not a problem, because suffering is not real, right? Meditate on it. Think about it. So you don't have to stop racism or oppression because why? It's not there. That's distracting you from achieving your God, consciousness with the God universe, right? So that's sort of that approach. Well, for the New Age sort of side, we could take the techno side, the technology side. That historically says, well, certain humans are more valuable than as we're using technology to advance ourselves. This is my problem with the transhumanist side of the singularity. Certain humans are farther along the evolving cycle to reaching that cosmic reality of singularity. So therefore, this is the argument that's been made in the past. I'm not making, this isn't a theory. This is the way it has played out. Historically, the way it played out is, well, some humans, because they are not as advanced as others, their existence keeps the rest of us from achieving our greater, the hope of singularity. It was done in a racial concept in the past towards people who were poor. So we don't want to help the poor. We don't want to let the lower races of people keep us from achieving singularity. So let them die their own natural death. Let them live their own existence. Maybe we don't have to be proactive in killing them off, but we certainly don't want to be helpful, at least. Who cares? Because they're keeping us down. Well, who decides which group of people are less valuable and more valuable? Well, therein lies the problem, right? So dealing with the problem of race is a very subjective within that techno-singularity goal, because which humans classify as lower on the hierarchy. And then for the New Age spiritualist, I don't think there's any metric of dealing with race. I just think that it's like, well, this is it becomes a purely preference of who is right or wrong. But if we privilege, say, Mother Earth, right? We have no problem with, there are philosophers who write for Princeton and Harvard and Yale that think humans are the enemy of Mother Earth, Gaia. Right? So if we all die off, that would actually be good. So who cares then if 1 million people die? And who cares what color they were at the time that they died? All humans are the enemy of progress towards cosmic consciousness and awareness. So there's in all of them, I would say there's no value for the individual, certainly no value for the individual. Broadly speaking, very few would value human life because they can't even define what human life is. So how do you value something you can't define? Or in the worst case, I get to define it. And if I say you're less than human, then I get to deal with you the way I see fit. So in the end, all of it is dehumanizing. All of it would have very little positive to contribute towards the problem of race and racism.
Well, now that we get to leave you all on that high note.
Jesus is the answer. Yay.
Yay. Right?
I'm trying to land on a positive.
Well, there's that. Well, gosh, I think that what you described and everything you just said is just the reality of...
I'm ending at happy balloons.
Thank you. What happens when we try to craft and construct our own God and our own morality and trying to put ourselves in a place of being oneness with or even evolve beyond God. This is the problem. We mess everything up. Like, he's God for a reason and I'm not. And that's a good thing. It's a good thing that you're not and that those watching are not, because only he truly understands what is good, true, and beautiful. He only understands justice. He has a way for us to understand the good, true, and the beautiful, and to participate in justice, and to do those things. And no, we're not saved by doing, but the reality that we can have relationship with him and we can live from a place that he calls us to is a beautiful thing, and it values life. And that's, I think, what I'm struck with is that so many other worldviews don't have an inherent value of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's the road we'll have to pick up when we get to Christian theology, and in our summaries of this too, because I think that's the best apologetic road. The problem of suffering, injustice, people want to value their grandmother, their mom and dad. They do, even though their worldview says they don't. And that becomes the inroad to untangling this squishy mess, to getting them, pointing them to Jesus, because he truly is the only way to value every individual, not as a tribe, not as a group, but as an individual.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And there's so much more I could say on that. But with that, we are over time. And so we want to respect your time, Joe, and you guys want to respect your time as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Come and watch next Tuesday, as we are still going through The Universe Next Door by Dr. James Sire. It's his Worldview catalog. Next week, we are going to be looking at, let me get to the table of contents quickly. We are going to look at postmodernism. I cannot wait. I've been waiting so long for postmodernism, and Islamic theism. And so I think these are two of the most important worldviews just on the scene today. And so make sure to join us for that, postmodernism and Islamic theism. I will still be joined with Dr. Joe Miller, and we want to say thank you for watching. Make sure to share this out with your friends, like us, follow our page, give us a thumbs up, and we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.